Yeah.
Then do we enable the process?
Which option? Background. Yeah. I can show you with other. మళ్ళీ నువ్వు ఒక్కోదానికి ఒక ఎగ్జాంపుల్ తీసుకుంటాను, కన్ఫ్యూజ్ అవుతారు. ఐమ్ నాట్ టచింగ్ ఇట్. టుమారో ఫర్ ద సేమ్ విల్ ప్లేస్ ఫైల్ ఇన్ ద సర్వర్, దెన్ టచ్ ఫ్రమ్ దేర్. పెద్ద టాపిక్ ఏం కాదు.
So when you do pseudo delta like this one, so if it's a database table in the ECC file, at the ECC level, the moment you execute, there's a timestamp for it, right? So that means if I'm running it today, it's saying 9th of Jan, right? It's saying 9th of Jan, but it's running it right now. But whatever transactions happen after this day, after this timestamp, till 10th of
Next day.
future, right? I mean, we're not, in this case, we haven't taken that time as well into consideration. Right?
But we don't have to say.
I'm just curious. That going
Actually,
forward,
for that, we would solve it something called safety lower limit.
exactly. Right?
There is a concept called safety lower limit, which we use it and solve it. See what he says. What he is asking is, so you are extracting with the date as current date. Let's say you are running at evening 7 o'clock now. After 7, if there are some transactions created and you run a load next day at saying date as 10th, are not going to miss those records. If you have to not miss, I should run this load only at night 12 o'clock exactly. I cannot guarantee you that. So what they do is they use something called safety lower limit and emutante. Even though I'm 10th, I just still bring one day back. I'll go back and bring in. Instead of bringing only 10th, I'll bring 9th and 10th. I know there will be some duplicate records, but I am reducing the chance of missing records. But I'm getting some duplicate records. I can override them by using ODS. Just moving one day back and then bringing is what they call it as safety lower limits. Okay. Okay, was fine. Next, we'll touch on the data. Is someone logging in? Okay, boss. Next, we're getting onto the data source aspect. Okay, right click and disk. So now, this is the name of your data source, and this is a description, and it's active because it's activated. Now we see the properties of the data source in different tabs here, and also options of data source keeps changing based on the source connection. If it is flat file, you see different set of properties. If it is R3, you see different set of properties. If it is DB connect, you get to see different properties. For now, we are touching on the data source of flat file. Major points. These are descriptions, the user and date and time when it was created. Okay, not to worry of other options now. In the extraction, you basically this part of it, you basically specify all the adapter, means the source object from where it has to extract the data. And this property delta process, understand this. I don't know, do I make sense now or not? I don't know, but try to understand this. Delta process property will indicate whether the data source supports delta or not. If it supports delta, the data source should have a logic written in it to identify the delta records. Whether is it going to use some timestamp mechanism like time or date or something to identify records. You have to, this data source should have that logic within if it is enabled delta. But this data source is not supporting delta, that's why it doesn't have any logic. Suppose if a data source is enabled for delta, it will definitely have some logic of identifying the delta records. The logic of identifying delta records is what we call delta mechanism అంటాం. ఏ లాజిక్ ద్వారా నీ డేటా సోర్స్ డెల్టా రికార్డ్స్ని గుర్తిస్తుంది, దాన్ని మనం డెల్టా మెకానిజం అంటాం. బట్ యాజ్ ఆఫ్ నౌ మై డేటా సోర్స్ ఇస్ నాట్ సపోర్టింగ్ డెల్టా ఫైన్. Had if it would have supporting the delta mechanism, it should have the logic of identifying the delta records, which is what we refer to as delta mechanism. Okay, Ravas? You have not seen that, we'll see the topics later. But there is something called what? Delta mechanism. It's a logic through which you identify that these records have been modified or created since the last upload. Okay, that is delta process. Okay. then that is delta mechanism. Then there is something called delta process. Okay, this, what does this tell you? Okay, you have with some logic of timestamp or date or something, you have identified the delta records. How these delta records are processed to BW is specified by delta process. What do you mean by processed? Okay, for example, let's say in the source I have one sales order, okay, with order value as, let's say, 5,000, and through init you brought this into BW. Okay, once it is loaded to BW, in the source the value of this order has been modified from 5,000 to, let's say, 6,000. 5,000 to 6,000. When it is modified to 6,000, by using some delta mechanism or logic, you have identified that this order has been changed. Once it is identified, this record has to be extracted in the delta load. Yes. So if delta load brings this data source with value of 6,000, it means it is giving me completely changed value. In that case, in BW, do I need to override that or add bus? If I load, already 5,000 was loaded to cube. If I bring this 6,000 and load it to cube, it becomes what? 11,000 bus. Because cube is what? Additive bus. So in this case, the delta process is after image. It is only giving me the changed value bus. So will it give? That is one case. The case could be like this. Say you have 5,000. It's already loaded to BW with init. Now the 5,000 is changed to 6,000. So through some mechanism you have identified that this record is modified. But when I extract delta, if it is able to give me the difference of it, 5,000 was changed to what? 6,000. Now what is the difference? 1,000. If it gives me only the difference, then can I load it to my cube and add it? That is delta process. So delta process will determine how these delta records are loaded into BW. Is it giving me only the changed value, or is it only giving me the difference bus? So based on this, you would be identifying whether should I load my data to the ODS and overwrite, or load it to cube and then add up bus. Because cube is additive. If I want to overwrite, I'll have to use what? ODS bus. But physically, you will observe this change values mechanism, all this, when you touch up R3 extractions. Not okay, fine. But for now, it says what? Delta only via full load means no delta mechanism, no delta supported. When there is no delta, will have delta process. When there is no delta mechanism, how can there be delta? That's why it says no delta, only via full upload. Next, what is this? Direct access. In SAP BW, we are going to have a concept called remote cubes. When I say remote cube, this is what it is. Let's say now you just been dealing with normal cube. You have a cube. You extract data from some source and loading in, right? So is my data physically present in this cube? Yes. So opposite to this or reverse to this concept, we have something called remote cube. You'll have the data in the source, you'll create some data source, you'll connect the data source to cube, but there's no loading done. When I run a report on this cube, at the runtime of the query, the cube will fetch data from source and give it to you. There is no data physically present in the cube at any point of time. Only at the runtime of the query, virtually it reads from the source and gives it to you. That's the remote cube. So now point is, now even when I am implementing remote cube, am I connecting one data source to it? So it's all about functionality of data source, whether my data source can read data virtually or not, or whether my data source supports virtual remote cubes or not. That is specified by this property. If you have direct access property allowed, it means this data source supports remote cube. Means any data source where the direct access property is set to allowed, they can be connected to a remote cube. And when it is connected to remote cube, there will be no loading, no data management in the cube, no data physically present in the cube. At the runtime of the query, it starts reading from the source and gives it to you. Now what it said, direct access, no DTP allowed for, there is no direct access is saying, means what? I cannot use this data source to connect to a remote cube, or I cannot use this data source to virtually access my source data. Okay, but if I drop to this and set it is what? Allowed. For example, if I change in, if I drop and set it is what? Allowed, then what? Then I can either load it, I can use this data source for normal loading or for connecting to remote cube also. Anyway, it's possible. Okay, okay. Then what is this here? Real time. I'm just touching you that. Itla concepts untayi telustayi and anthing em. So there's something called real time bus. Okay. In BW we are going to have something called RDA, real time data acquisition or concept. So when I say real time data acquisition, for example, let's say from 5 years they've been using ECC. They create say 1 lakh transactions. I bring all those 1 lakh transactions to BW today with init. I've initialized everything now. From then onwards, every day whatever they create, I will be loading into BW bus. Let's say from morning 9 o'clock till evening 6 o'clock is my business hours. So from morning 9 o'clock to 6 o'clock, they will be creating all the postings. After 6, I will be loading them into what? BW. Let's say the next day they create 100 transactions from morning 9 to 6. At 6:30, I perform a load. So through Delta, so the new 100 records come into BW bus. Okay, same way next day they create 50. Again, the evening I load, again 50 comes in. Yeah. So now, when I'm running my reports in BW today, is it reflecting transactions only of till yesterday? Can I say BW is yes or no? Today is yesterday. In BW, whatever the report I'm seeing, it's only reflecting the transactions which have been loaded only last night. So last night you loaded transactions of what? Yesterday's database. So when I'm running reports today in the morning, I'm able to reflect only the transactions which has been posted last night, which is of yesterday's only. And what are the, let's say next day morning at 12 o'clock I'm running. Am I getting the transactions which are created from morning 9 to 12? No. I'll get them available only on the next day bus. So do we have a lot of data latency of one day? So now users are not really happy with this. They want to do online. They want real-time data. Real-time data, as and when there is a transaction created, they want it in the reporting bus. Then we could use that concept called remote cube. I was telling you, when you say remote cube, what? It virtually accesses the data from source. Whenever I run my query, if I am fetching from source, is it not real-time completely? But when I do those concepts, the performance of the queries are really low. Why? Cube lo data techede barugu. It does take time when it has to fetch data from cube to report. But if it has to fetch from source, obviously it would take a lot of time. So that's why, considering the performance reasons, remote queue would not be the solution bus. So, but if I do normal loading, again I have got data latency bus. So between these two, they came out with the concept called RDA, real-time data acquisition bus. Then what they do in this case is they will do init. Okay, they will bring 1 lakh all the historical data. From then on, what they do to load it to the target. You want info package, you want DDP, right? They create one info package, they create one DDP, connect and link both these to something called daemon. Okay, and then they set this daemon to run for every 2 minutes. For every 2 minutes, the daemon would be running in, and so for every 2 minutes, my info package DDP runs in, and the data from the source will be brought into BW automatically. Only you have latency of only 2 minutes. So to have the info package DTP to run continuously with the help of daemon, they use concept called RDMS. Now I can set up the info packages based on data source. I can have my info package connected to daemon only if my data source supports real time. Otherwise, no. Does my data source supports real time? Not support. So the info package based on this cannot be connected to daemon. That's the concept. Does this data source supports real time data acquisition or not? If it supports, then the info package of this data source can be linked up to daemon. Otherwise, no. Okay, fine. And this is all properties I think should be known for you. Yes, something. I think someone is trying to correct. You work just disconnect కొడతాను ఎవరు నాకు తెలిసి ఈ ఆప్షన్ ఫస్ట్. I think proposal you should know this, and in the fields, so in the fields tab you basically customize your transfer structure of your data sources. Okay, and then preview, you get to see preview of your data. So, and can I say data source is nothing but PSA? Whenever you activate data source, it does create a PSA table. And how do you get to know the name of the table? From the manager, you can know the name of the table. I can open this table in SQL. It's normal database table, not internal table. It's normal database table. I get to see this table structure in my S11. What is the structure of this table? Transfer structure plus 4 fields: request number, data packet, record number, and partition number. And does your PSA hold exactly the data what is coming from source without modification? Yes. And can I do editing in PSA? Yes. Fine, boss. Yeah. and let's look at this one. I have one R3 data source for you. That data source to do. I told you based on source it changes, right? Now in the extraction, do you see any file details? All this? It just says it has to extract it using some API. API and a program, application programming interface. So based on the source, your data source progress keeps changing. Yeah? There's no preview here. It's only the fields here. Fields again what? Is it not transfer structure? So in the extraction, basically extraction tab will have all the details on the source. If it is flat file details. If it is DB connect, table details. If it is R3, the program details. And now does it support, what is this? It says ABR. Does it support delta bus? Yes. ABR complete delta support. Yes. Now direct access not supported. Does it support real time? No.